Welcome to the Mind Sensei Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Taz, and I'll be taking you on a journey to the world of martial arts and introduce listeners to some of the most inspiring and knowledgeable practitioners from around the world. Whether you're a seasoned martial artist or a curious beginner, or just enjoy hearing a great story, the Mind Sensei Podcast Down Under has something for everyone. So tune in, sit back, and let us take you on a journey through the world in martial arts. Welcome to the Mind Sensei Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Taz, and today we have the incredible honor of speaking with a true warrior and scholar in the world of martial arts, Mr. Bryan Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins' journey in Kenpo Karate began over 40 years ago, back in 1980, at the iconic West Los Angeles studio. He was a private student of the legendary Senior Grandmaster Edmund K, the founder of American Kenpo Karate. From 1987 until Mr. Parker's timely passing in 1990, Mr. Hawkins managed the West LA school, carrying forward a legacy that few have had a privilege to inherit directly. Because of his unique and deeply personal connection, Mr. Hawkins is known as one of the authorities on American Kenpo Karate today. His expertise even extended to Hollywood, where he served as a technical advisor alongside Mr. Parker on the film The Perfect Weapon, and has since contributed to numerous television and film projects. Mr. Hawkins is a visionary leader that owns and operates multiple Bryan Hawkins Kenpo Karate studios across California and serves as the president of the United Kenpo Systems, an organization which affiliates around the globe. As the founding Senior Grandmaster Ed Parker once said, "My name on that sign is what brings people in, but Bryan's name is what keeps them there." Mr. Hawkins has been a vital torchbearer for the Kenpo spirit community, especially in West Los Angeles, a place rich in Kenpo history. So today we dive deep into Mr. Hawkins' remarkable journey, his insights on martial arts, and enduring legacy of Kenpo Karate. So Mr. Hawkins, welcome to the Mind Sensei Podcast. It's great to finally have you on, sir.
My pleasure.
Let's kick the party off and let's talk about what inspired you to get started and where your martial arts journey began.
I would say if there was one thing that got martial arts on my mind, it was the Kung Fu television series that was on. I think I was in 6th or 7th grade when that came on. And even at that time, I had already started some wrestling and did a little bit of boxing. But when I saw the Kung Fu series with David Carradine, again, in a young man's life, I thought, now that's something I should eventually try out. But I come from a family of 10 kids, and karate lessons took money. I found my way into boxing without having to pay. I wrestled through a club where I didn't have to pay, and my parents didn't have to pay, that is. But I knew martial arts was going to cost some money. So I kept that in the back of my mind. And I'm one day on my way. I lived in a little town called Modesto, California at the time. On my way down to the boxing gym, I always passed this martial arts dojo. Again, I'm in a little town. I think they had 2 martial arts dojos. I passed this thing again and again. And one day, I don't know what it was, I thought, I turned my bike around and I rode back to that dojo. So I'm going to walk in there and just have a look-see, check it out. And I walked in immediately. I just felt a good vibe in there. I felt strong about this. I like this. Karate pictures all over, and big old guy walks out of the office. It's about the size, I guess, I grew to be, but when you're a 15-year-old kid or 14, whatever I was, young, he was pretty large, about 6'3", about 230. He started talking to me, big Japanese American. His dad was American and his mom was Japanese, and he started telling me about martial arts. And he said, he immediately, I was the only one, it was before classes started, and I guess he had the gift of gab that day and started telling me about this and that. And he said, pointed to a trophy and pointed to a picture up on the wall. That picture had Chuck Norris in it. And at the time, I don't think I knew who Chuck Norris was at the time. I knew who Bruce Lee was, but anyway, a bunch of other guys. He says, that's me with, these guys. I won 3rd place in the World Karate Championships that year in the late 60s, I guess, or just 4 or 5 years before I was in his dojo. I says, really? He says, yeah. It's called the International Karate Championships. And he says, down in Long Beach, California, not to me, I was like, I didn't know who Ed Parker was. I didn't know anything. So he says, yeah. And he said, I did that 2 years in a row. He named the two guys that beat him. One, I think one was Joe Louis, beat him in the for first and second place. The other one was Ron Martini. It was an Ed Parker fighter. I can't remember which one it was. So he lost to two of the best fighters around at the time. Anyway, I trained there. Like I say, it was strong, just straight Shotokan. Filled some good instructors there. As I'd ride my bike down there after school and train 2 or 3 hours and come home in the dark. And it was great. It was a great experience. And one day I went over there, and
Was that 1975?
that was right in 1975. I think it was late 75. And one day I went back there and the doors were locked. And I waited, and some more people showed up, and some more, and no luck. The next day I went back, and one of the instructors was standing out front, just locking the door again. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Yeah, Mr. Carter had the guy's name was Dana Carter, the owner, big Japanese guy. He had to close up shop." I never asked really why or anything. He says, "I says, are you going to reopen?" He goes, "No, I think that's it. I think he has some family problems he had to go take care of." So one of my, like I said, I have 9 brothers and sisters. So one of my sisters at the time was taking karate at the other karate school in town. And I said, well, I love this. I got to go check out her place. And I did. And at the time it was a style called Shoshu. There was about 6 locations throughout the Central Valley at the time, in Fresno, Modesto, and other places. And it was run by some brothers named the Moore brothers, Al and Ralph Moore. And I liked it a lot. It was, the years later, I was to find out it was really just a mix of some white crane kung fu and Ed Parker's Kenpo. I came to find out that the Moore brothers trained at one time with Steve LeBounty, who trained at one time with Ed Parker. That's where they learned most of what they were teaching. They just kind of moved things around and added some white crane kung fu, but they had a whole story behind it. They said they were the only Caucasians ever allowed into the Shaolin Temple in China. So they had a whole line and a whole story they would tell all the students. We're young. I was now 16, and yeah, it sounded good to me. I got a few of my high school buddies, wrestlers, to get in there and do it as well. Again, it was a good dojo. It run by some good people and a lot of good students there. And then I trained at that place, and then it got a little more heavy into wrestling, so I had to back off just a little bit, and then went back. And then they decided to close up, and I think they even reopened. But it's all right, because I had having done that for a while, and then I graduated high school at 17, and I thought, no, I'm going to move to Los Angeles, and for a lot of reasons. I just wanted to go move to the big city. I'd grown up in a little tiny town called Paradise, California, way up in Northern California. Then we moved to Modesto, California, all 10 kids and my parents. And I said, I need to get to a big city. We had a lot of relatives down here in Los Angeles. And that last school I was with, the Shoshu school run by the Moore brothers, they said, well, you're going to Los Angeles. I said, yeah, where would I train? You guys have a dojo down there. They said honestly, and to this day, I appreciate them for being honest. They said, oh no, we're the second best karate system around on the planet. They said the best karate system on the planet is run by Mr. Ed Parker. And I says, yeah, who's Ed Parker? They said, oh, Ed Parker started everything. I said, what do you mean started everything? They said they were pretty well versed. They said, oh, he opened up the first karate school. He was Elvis's teacher. He was Bruce Lee. He got Bruce Lee his start and all this stuff. And so by that time, Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon had been out for a couple of years, at least 2 or 3 years. And so everyone knew who Bruce Lee was at that time. So I said, really? Yeah, he really was the beginning of everything. We wouldn't even be here. Running commercial schools was Ed Parker. They said, so go down there and find Ed Parker's American Kenpo. I stowed that away in my brain and moved to LA with no money, moved in with my uncle. I knew I was going to be there just for 2 months. He helped get me a job, and driving a truck while I was going to college. I went to college, drove that truck, and driving that truck around in a place called Santa Monica, California. One day I drove by this dojo, and there was a huge graphic, a painting up on the wall. And, years later, I'd find out that was a painting of Ed Parker and Tom Kelly. And on the side of the wall, I mean, it was a 2-story building, the side of that wall, and it was them on the side. And I'm thinking, wow, what's this? And I drove around to the front of the building and it said Ed Parker's American Kenpo. I went, oh, wow. Saturday, I was doing some overtime on Saturday, trying to earn some extra money to make ends meet as a young kid. And I walked in, I saw over in the corner some guys sparring. I said, okay, well, I've done that. That's good. That's great. And I saw some guys doing some stand-up manipulations. So I like that. I like to have done a lot of that. 'Cause I'd done a little bit of judo mixed in with other things because a wrestling buddy of mine was a judo black belt as well. So he taught some things. And then I saw them working with some guns, some practice guns and clubs. Like, oh, that's cool. So it was a class. It was right after a Saturday class ended. So there was a lot of guys still there, all adults. And then I saw 2 guys fighting against 1 guy. And that's the thing that clicked in my mind. I said, now that, in my experience as a young man, that's how fights really happen. Where I come from, up in the mountains, all these cowboys and these guys who took fighting real seriously. It's almost never one-on-one. It was always turned into more than that. I thought, now that's good. And then there are a few other guys doing some techniques. And I had seen techniques in my last system, but not like this. This was much more advanced. So that's kind of how I got started in my early martial arts. And that would actually led into my first jaunt into Ed Parker's Kenpo. And it was that Saturday driving my truck around. So.
Okay. So was that 1980 that you started Kenpo?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I think it was the fall. I think that was like the late summer or something of 1980. I took some of that time off. So I moved down to LA. I think, late 79, and then, worked and went to school and kind of saving some money, move out of my uncle's place, get my own place. And then I thought, okay, now it's time to look for a martial arts. And I actually found it by chance. Wasn't even looking. And I found it. And yeah, so that would be probably the fall of 1980.
Shotokan, how far did you get in Shotokan?
Well, I was only there a year and a half, and I got up to green belt. So that was like in that particular school, was like their 4th belt up, I think. Um,
There was a lot of belts back then though, right?
no, no, I think it went to white, uh, orange, green, and then brown. And then in Shoshu, I believe I got to blue in that one. Blue or green. But again, I took a little time off of that to prepare to move to LA. And then when I got to LA, I took a little bit more time off, but just, a months at a time until I knew I could afford it because I'd have to pay for karate. Sure enough, back then it was $395 for the whole year. And so that $400 I paid to join that first Ed Parker school, I think I had, $500 in the bank, and I paid $395 for the year. That's it. Yeah, but I know I'm going to stay. And then after that, I mean, within that year, I was already teaching and helping out a lot in my free time, which wasn't much free time, but I've always liked teaching. I think having a lot of younger brothers and sisters, you can kind of get into teaching naturally anyway. But I enjoyed it, so that's how I didn't have to pay anymore after that, which was great. But yeah, that's how that all started.
And when you started in Kenpo, what was it the West LA studio was the first one
Yeah.
you went to?
Yeah.
Okay. And who was running that at that stage?
The manager of the dojo then was Larry Tatum. When I went in on a Saturday, a guy named Shane was there, and then just a whole bunch of guys. One of the guys that was out there working out that day was a guy named Lex Sensenbrenner, another guy with John Corrigan. And those 2 guys, those 2 black belts that I remember seeing that first day were, to this day, 2 of the better black belts I've ever been around is those 2. John was a much shorter, stouter guy. Lex was, 6'4", 6'5", taller than I was, large, a little heavier than I was. And both great guys to learn from. And they were both there that day as well. And no, it was great.
So how far did you get in when you started to when you connected with Mr. Parker?
Well, I think I tested for brown belt. I think I tested for brown belt in 81. I kind of went through the lower ranks pretty quick. I had experience and I was young and athletic. And I think Larry um, was anxious to get guys like me up to rank. You know, any instructor who has good students under him, makes that instructor look good. And so, you oftentimes you want to move up your better students quicker. That means that's something a lot of instructors have done over the years. And so I think 81, late 81, I got brown. And then in 80, I think it was June 21st, 84, I tested for black. That sounds right. Um, so, um, so yeah, it went fairly quick, but there were, 3 levels of brown. And I remember skipping, back then as now, I still had the same tradition. You only test for ranks of brown belt at the most every 6 months. And I think I passed up a couple different tests just because, I wanted to be really ready for each test and not just keep flying through and get black from, I wanted to have it completely meritorious. So June 21st, 84 was when I tested for black.
But then when did you connect with Mr. Parker? Tell us about that
I
story.
was going to say on that first brown belt test was the first time I believe I actually met him. I was competing in the internationals. Me and Muhammad went down there together in 1981 and I think 1982, and saw Mr. Parker, but I didn't know him. And I don't even think I went over there to introduce myself. Who am I to go introduce myself to Ed Parker? I was just out there competing and having fun with a lot of friends. But in my first brown belt test is the first time I saw him. But connecting with him and becoming a student, that was in late 1987 is when that actually happened. So that's when we became real close. And that's when, all that changed. But prior to that, just seeing him on tests, seeing him in internationals, maybe a couple other occasions here and there, But
So what was your experience in 1987 like? Tell us that story.
well, in 1984, earlier than that, I decided in what year is that? So the Olympics were here in 1984. And so in late 1983, I came back to LA. I was gone for the summer of 83. I left Los Angeles, went up to California, worked on some landscaping and construction, and up there, and spent some time with my family. As I had a lot of younger brothers, sisters. I had not spent much time with, so I wanted to kind of spend some time with them and do all the things we used to do, 3 years before I moved, and spent some good quality time. And I, finished a couple of years of college and going to see which direction I was going to go in or exactly where I was going next. I knew eventually I wanted to own my own business. It probably was going to involve the martial arts to one degree or another. Wasn't sure, but I had a lot of interest and I was loose and fancy free. I was 22 years old at the time, something like that, young. And when I came back, I thought a lot of my friends that I had been teaching in the spring before were in the movie business, in the stunt business. And they said, Bryan, and we've seen you fly around this dojo with doing techniques and getting them done on you and doing them. And, I was an acrobat as a kid, so I could move around pretty well and do some tumbling and things. And they said, you should be a stuntman. You really should. And so they started to help me get connected to the right people to do some stunts, and started getting into that. And someone came to me and said, hey, while you're doing that, if you're not going right back to college, why don't you come do some bodyguard work with this company we know who needs drivers, and they especially need someone who can drive and do some light bodyguard work. And I said, what's that mean, light bodyguard work? They said, well, everything else the bodyguard does except you don't carry a gun. It's so possible to get a carry permit unless you're a cop. So I said, no, that sounds good. So I went and did that. And I was working with this limousine company, and driving and doing some light bodyguard work, getting some good money. And so it was great. And I thought a lot of the clients started saying, you know, when I call back, can I request you? I said, sure, I guess. And then they started to. And pretty soon I had a lot of people in a very short period of time, like 3 months. And I thought, I should just do my own business. And they were telling me, you should just do your own business. So I said, hmm. So I contacted a couple of my relatives, told them what I wanted to do. They were all in. So they got some money together, and we had 2 limousines put into manufacturing. We had them from the bottom up, and I decided, well, now's the best time to do it because the Olympics are in '84. I've got all these guys that are going to jump in with me and be my clients. Let's just do it. So I had those limousines in progress; they were being made, and I left that limousine company and was kind of just doing similar work by myself. But I was okay. I moved back with my uncle. He was one of my partners. So I was going to save some more money. So you're my partner now, uncle. I'll move in with you. We'll keep one of the limousines in your garage and one over at cousin Joe's. And so it's great. And right about that time in the fall of '83, went to work out down at the dojo one night, and one of the guys I didn't recognize there, and asked Tony Martin or Muhammad or somebody. I say, Mo, who's this guy? And he says, oh, he's Jeff. He's a good guy. He's from Missouri. So cool. So we're working out. We do the class, and I get changed as I'm walking out. Jeff's kind of waiting out in the front room for me. And he introduced himself again. So Jeff Speakman. I said, oh, hey, Jeff. He says, I hear you guys go and get, some beers across the street usually after you work out. He says, we do, little adult beverages. He says, can I come? I'd like to talk to you about something. I said, oh, sure. So we walked across the street and did what we would do, but everyone else had left. And Jeff and I had a long talk, and he gave me his whole story of moving out here from Missouri and had certain plans, and some of those plans fell through. And now he's looking for a job, probably a place to live, and pretty soon a vehicle. That's it. Wow. You got a lot of eggs in one basket, didn't you? So, but he's a great guy. And I said, absolutely. I says, here's what, let's do this. I still can probably get you a job with the last limousine company I worked for. And you're a martial artist. Jeff's real good looking and, handling himself real well. I says, you're all martial artists. You're great. And Jeff's a natural salesman, so I knew he'd do well. So we went over there and started working for the company I used to work for. I said, work there until I'm ready to go. I'm kind of putting it all together with my partners. And when I have it ready, probably, in a few, 3 or 4 months, maybe, I'll give you a call and you'll be the first driver. He said, all right, it's a deal. So started training together and doing everything we do. And that's basically how it went. He worked for that company. When I opened mine, he came over and started working for us. Eventually started using one of the limousines to kind of as his personal car for a time being until he got situated with his own car. And we lived together for a while on and off, between places like a lot of young guys do. You live with that friend, you live with that friend. And yeah, that's how Jeff and I met. And that's how we became close friends and just training together. And I'm telling you, between limousine runs, between bodyguard jobs, between all this stuff, that's when Jeff was learning most of his Kenpo. He says, hey, I remember taking him to a barbecue at Tony Martin's house, Big Tony from England. And a bunch of our Kenpo guys were there. And we were putting everything down. We were having our fun. And one Jeff said, hey, come show me the second, the last third of long 4. I said, Jeff, we're at a barbecue. Tony says, that's all right, man. I taught him the first part. I'll take some. So Tony took Jeff out into the driveway and taught him the last part of long form 4. And Jeff was just sucking up the information as fast as he could. And so that was Jeff's whole first, year in Kenpo was doing that, every minute he could, working on all the stuff. I got on full time with Ed Parker. That was technically, it was the first part of 1980, but I started going to his house and getting prepped, I think late 87. So leading up to that, we did all the limousine stuff, right? All that bodyguard stuff. Well, somewhere in 1986, I had the company for about 2 years. I was warned before I went into the limousine business by some relatives of mine who were just businessmen. They said, Brian, limousine work and bodyguard stuff, it's very personal. And those people are going to be calling you 24/7. And you're going to feel obligated to go. They're going to be someplace where they need your help, or they're going to decide to go do something at 11 o'clock at night and want to stay out all night. All that stuff. And it's going to drive you crazy. I said, I'm young. It's fine. I'll be good. Well, let me tell you, after 2 years, it took me away a lot from training. It was driving me crazy. I had about 7 drivers at one time. One of my younger sisters was the secretary. Yeah, my uncle was running the books and all this stuff, but it was 24/7. It was 24/7. It was too much. I said, yeah, this is killing me. And other things were going on at it. One of my older brothers passed away at that time. And it's just like, all right, enough of this. The 2 years of this was enough. So I sold the company to a place called hotel called the Bel Air Hotel. The Bel Air Hotel at the time, probably still is, but at the time was the most expensive hotel in Los Angeles. That's where the biggest of the biggest stars, all the Arab oil sheiks and all those crazy people came there because it was the most expensive hotel. It was up in the hills of Beverly Hills, beautiful. But I had some connections there, some people I knew who ran their limousine company. So I said, look, I've got 2 limousines. I want to sell them to you, and I'll sell you my clients too. Basically, I just wanted to unload them. I didn't care what they offered. Just unload this, take this off my plate, and to pay off my partners and be done with it. They said, oh, absolutely, with one caveat. What's that? You have to come work for us for a year. I said, well, all right. And back then you had beepers. No cell phones back then, beepers. They said, just carry a beeper. And I said, I really don't want to work. I mean, if you really need me for something, call me, but I'm not really looking for a lot of work right now. I need to go train. I need to get my life back. They said, okay. And they said, especially though, if someone does, they want to be accompanied somewhere. I said, okay, fine. So almost immediately, I think within a week or two, they call me or beat me. And I get to a payphone. I don't know where I am. I get to a payphone. And I call them and say, what is it? And they say, hey, Dr. Johnson is here and he needs your services. And I'm thinking, they said it in such a way, I felt I'm supposed to know who Dr. Johnson is. I don't know who Dr. Johnson is. I said, come on, isn't so-and-so there? Isn't so-and-so there? They go, doesn't matter. This is one you need to go do. I think, why are they so insistent? Anyway, I said, all right, do you need me tonight? They go, no, you need to come tonight for an interview. I says, I'm interviewing this person, Dr. Johnson. I need to interview? All right. So I went there. I get there and a lot of the guys in front of the hotel that worked for the company are standing there. And as I'm coming through, they go, oh gosh, you're late. Come on. He's been waiting. And I look at one guy, I says, who is this Dr. Johnson? And he looks at me like I'm mad. He goes, you don't know? And he says it kind of quick. So I still didn't catch it. I walked through and the 2 owners are there. And they said, Brian, we really want this to go well. Well, they tell me where it is. They point me to the most expensive bungalow this place had. At that time, it was like $18,000 a night. It was insane. This is 1986, something like that, 87 or late 86. Yeah. And so I go up there and you have to walk up this path way, way, way to the very end of the property. I knock on the door and this guy answers the door, right? I'm still thinking I'm there to meet Dr. Johnson. Well, the guy who answers the door, I recognize. The guy that answered the door used to be John Lennon's manager, and his name was Elliot Mintz. And I recognize this guy, John Lennon's manager. He was John Lennon's manager and he did it all John Lennon's business. His name was Elliot Mintz. So I'm thinking, wow, this Dr. Johnson knows Elliot Mintz. That means he probably knew John Lennon. That's a big name for me. I was like, yeah, all right, I'm a Beatles fan. Yeah, now I'm thinking, cool, I'm glad I came on this. I walk in the room and I'm walking, and there on the couch is sitting an actor that I recognized, but I didn't know his name off the top of my head, but I recognized him. And Elliot Mintz comes up and said, "Brian, I'd like you to meet Don Johnson." I said, and right then it all clicked. I went, "You idiot, not Dr. Johnson, it's Don Johnson." And at the time, Miami Vice was the biggest show on television. Don Johnson was the highest paid TV star ever at that time. And I knew that because my uncle used to work for Bill Cosby. And that was just 2 years earlier. And Bill Cosby, 2 years earlier, was the highest paid um, TV personality at $1 million an episode. Don was getting more than that now. So he was a big deal. So, so I guess sit there, I go, oh my God, I'm feeling stupid now. If I sit down and Don's being very aloof. And but I recognize Don Johnson. You know where I recognize him from? I recognized him because he was on one episode of the old series Kung Fu with David Carradine. And I was a fan of that years before. And he said something, and we're just kind of getting acquainted. And frankly, I really didn't care if I got the job or not. I really didn't want to work at the time. I wanted just to train. Literally, I wanted to go back to the dojo and just train my ass off. And he says, we're talking about something. Elliot's talking, and we're all kind of talking, but Don's acting very aloof. And I picked that up, and I'm thinking, I don't need this guy. I don't need this at all. So I was thinking, screw him. So I'm not here begging for a job. They sent me here. I'm not here because I want to be there. So I'm not. Now I'm going to be aloof. And then he says, "Oh, Elliot says something about Elvis Presley," and Don leans in and says, "I got to ask you, did you ever meet Elvis?" I said, as in, no, Elvis was a little bit before my time. Remember at the time we're talking, Elvis had only passed away like 9 years before that. But Don Johnson, comes to find out, is an enormous Elvis fan. And Don knew a lot about Ed Parker because he was an Elvis fan. He was a huge Ed Parker fan. The minute he found that out, so he says, I said, "I never met Elvis." He says, "You know Ed Parker, though?" I says, I do know Ed Parker." And he just kind of relaxes and kind of gets on the couch and just starts whipping off questions about martial arts, about Bruce Lee, about Elvis Presley, he was like a kid in a candy store. Lots of questions. That's what I did. So needless to say, I left that night and they called me. As I left, Elliot Mintz says, "I haven't seen Don this excited in months." But he says, "We've interviewed 40 people for this." He goes, "Believe me, you'll be getting a call in the morning." I was like, cool, great. I still didn't want to work, but I thought, this might be fun. This guy's the biggest movie star, right? The TV star in the world right now. Yeah, this might be fun. I only worked for Don Johnson when he was in LA. So when he was in Florida and other places, he had a guy named, what was his name? Anyway, his main bodyguard had been with him for years, lived in Florida with him. I met that guy, older guy, real big guy. He knew Ed Parker. He experienced Ed Parker once. He said at a seminar, and it was a hilarious conversation. Yeah, big Ron something. Anyway, so when Don Johnson was in town, they would call me, and I would go get one of their cars and go pick him up there wherever he was. Sometimes at the Bel Air Hotel, and then he'd be in town for like a week, doing all kinds of different publicity stuff, and I'd be on call with him for a week or so, maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe longer. Then he'd leave for a month. Then he'd come back. So it was a perfect gig for me. And I negotiated a deal where I got paid to be a driver, and I got paid to be a bodyguard, and I got paid by the hotel as well. So I was getting paid by 3 different things. So for a young guy, 25, 26 years old, it's making great money, no worries, no entanglements. So it was a really good thing for me. I was still working out a lot and doing all that stuff. And it was I think in like August or September, maybe September, October of 87. Yeah, it had to be right around then. Yes, because we did Mr. Parker's tribute in 1988, and we were already working on some of the stuff for the tribute. Um, so somewhere in the fall of '87, I realized I couldn't be at that dojo anymore. The manager of that, there were things going on at that dojo that just like, this is not a place where I want to train. And I would even have all the guys that I trained. I'd say, "Hey, come on Saturday, after noon. We'll do all of our stuff then." Or I think there was another night that it was another night. It was a good night for me to be there with all my guys, and I would train them then. Um, so Larry Tatum was the manager at the time, and it was time not it just time for me not to be there. It's time for me to be on my own. I thought, well, I was planning on going, so this is a good enough time to say I'm making really good money over here with Don. I talked to two different people, Frank Trejo and Barbara Hale. Now, Barbara Hale had Mr. Parker's ear. She ran the Ventura School, her own school, but he was she did a lot of business with him and knew him really well. So I just actually, in passing, mentioned it to her. I said, here's what my plans are, Barbara. I'm going to leave, and when I leave, probably 20 of these, guys that I've been teaching for all these years are going to come with me. I'm not going to tell them to come. I'm not going to steal them, but I'm going to go someplace and start teaching, and they're going to take me. So they're going to come with me. So I want to let Mr. Parker know. She says, well, I'll see him in about 4 days, because she'd go out there once a week and have a lesson, but also run through what's going on at her school, just different things. She was helping him with some things. So she calls me back like 3 or 4 days later. She says, "Brian," she goes, I said, "Well, did you talk to Ed Parker? Is everything okay?" She goes, "Oh yeah, everything's fine. I told him." And I'm thinking, see, I was upset he might get angry. I mean, if I was in his shoes, I would. That's money out the door that some black belt's taking away. And she says, "No, well, he wants to talk to you." I went, this isn't going to be good. He wants to talk to me. I said, "All right. All right. Where does he want to talk to me?" She goes, "He wants you to come out to his house." Oh, crap. Going out to Parker's house, huh? Well, this could be really good or really bad. And she said something like, "No, Brian, I think it's a really good thing." So I thought, okay. And at that point, I kind of knew what might be happening. So I went out there, and I was nervous. I was very nervous. I knew Ed Parker. He'd been on 3 tests, 4 tests. I had short conversations. I had been working with, a lot of, the biggest names in Hollywood through Don Johnson and some through other sources. And I never got nervous around celebrities. I was always nervous around Ed Parker. On testing, I was nervous. When he would he stopped into the dojo a couple times, and it's like, "Oh, Ed Parker's here." And, I got nervous. It's like one of the only men can make me nervous, yeah. And so I went out there but I remember thinking, why am I've met lots of famous people, and it wasn't much. Ed Parker, I was nervous. So I went out there, and he basically told me, I've been having, I've been, well, he said, "I've been wanting to make changes at the West LA Dojo for quite a while now." I'll put it that way. And then I heard you were leaving, and I heard a lot of people go with you. He says, "But I also heard that you're probably the guy that would replace the current manager." And I said, "Well," and see, at the time, there was a lot of senior ranks. I mean, this was 87. So I'd only been a black belt 3 years, and there are guys that have been there literally since the 50s, lost since the 60s, a whole slew of them since the 70s. 2 of them had already managed his dojo years and years before. I'm thinking, so I said, "Mr. Parker, I've got to be very honest with you. I decided some years ago, in fact, it was only about a year before that, I am going to open up my own dojo. I'm probably going to open it up up on the coast of California, in Carpinteria, maybe something like that. And so if this is really what you'd like me to do, I'd be honored. I'll give it my all. I would love to do it. But in uh, maybe 1991, 92, maybe I could do this for 4 or 5 years for you. And then I want to open up my own and do an Ed Parker school, is what I said to him. And he's looking at me and he says, Bryan, you open up a school 4 or 5 years or anytime, anywhere. You don't put Ed Parker's name on it. You put your name on it. Because the minute I teach this to anybody, the minute I teach it to somebody, it's your Kenpo now. He says, the Kenpo you do right now, is Bryan Hawkins Kenpo Karate. I do Ed Parker's Kenpo. We all do American Kenpo, but I do, you do, he does. So your name should be on it. I'll help you in any way I can. And yes, 4 or 5 years sounds good. And that was the deal we struck. And then it was just some details we had to work out and things like that. But it worked out well. It worked out well. And that's how I came to working for Ed Parker. Then, so once that was done, I had to go back and tell Don Johnson and Elliot that I couldn't do it anymore. So first I talked to Elliot, and Elliot's not happy. How about Bryan, just the weeks that we're out here? He says, Don really likes the way you do things. He's comfortable with you. It's been a great, year or whatever it's been on and off since we've been doing our thing. He says, so, what do we need to do? Is it about money? And I'm thinking, oh my God, now I could bargain for more money. I said, no, Elliot, it's not about the money. I says, Ed Parker is like my idol of all idols. I says, you know how Don looks at Elvis Presley? And he goes, yeah. I says, I look at Ed Parker the same way. And now he's asked me to come work for him. The premier karate person in probably a century has asked me to come run his primary dojo, his flagship school. I says, I'm sorry, Elliot, it's been great working with you guys, but I've got to take this opportunity. So again, no cell phones back then. So he says, look, can we call you tomorrow at 10 a.m., whatever he said, because Don was coming back in town. And I wasn't going to be there because I had to go meet Ed Parker the next day. I says, I'm so sorry. He says, well, Don's definitely going to want to talk to you in person or personally, on the phone. I says, okay. And I get a call the next morning, whatever it was, from Elliot again. He passed the phone to Don. And at first, Don's hot. He's trying to think, buddy, how are you going to get me to come back work for you when Elliot must have already told you what this means to me? And he knew Ed Parker. He knew who he was, rather, the man. And so he starts saying this and this. And I said, Don, he said, Bryan, this could build you into a career. I mean, you could be one of the most well-known, personal service bodyguards around. Just, Bruce wants you to start doing him, Bruce Willis. All these guys want you now, this and this. I'm going, I know, but this is Ed Parker. And eventually this is what I want to do. Now he's asked me to run his dojo. Oh yeah, I've got to do this. He says, okay, I can respect that. I understand. I'm not happy, but I understand. Click. That was it. Last time I talked to Don. But that's how that all went down.
So he was happy, but he never spoke to you again.
Well, yeah, I mean, Don was the kind of guy, there was no reason for us to, we weren't best friends. And that year I mean, I met so many people through him, and just, and to give you the magnitude of who he was at the time, I remember leaving the night I interviewed with Don Johnson, right? No, it was like a week later. One of my first evenings or days with Don Johnson, we went to some big award show, right? We come back to the Bel Air Hotel, and I walked Don to his room, make sure everything's good. I'm walking back down the sidewalk in the hotel, big luxury, but it's outdoors part of the hotel. And around the corner runs what appeared at first to be a couple of probably, teen boys, 15, 16, 17-year-old boys. And the one in front ran right into me and boom, bounces off me, right? He hits, but I kind of grab his shoulder as he hits me because they ran right around the corner. I mean, like at full speed. He, he bounces off. And I grab his shoulders and I hold it back like this. And I'm looking at him. And he had a baseball hat, but knocked his hat off. And I'm looking at this kid and I'm going, I recognize this guy, but I couldn't. This is how little I followed TV and movies back then. I'm looking at this kid and he says, "Oh, mister, I'm so sorry." And that some other kids behind him. And that other kid was another, I think it was either Kiefer Sutherland or what was one of those other young kids who came up to big, Kevin Bacon or Kiefer Sutherland, something like that. But the guy I was holding was Tom Cruise. I'm holding him like this. And, and I kind of set him down. And he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I say, "Hey, no problem." And I couldn't put a name to his face. But he said, and I start walking past him. He goes, "Excuse me." I turn around. "What?" He says, You're Don Johnson's bodyguard, huh?" And I says, "Yeah." And Tom looks up to the room where I just walked up Don and came back where he ran into me. He looks up, he goes, "What's he like?" So this is Tom Cruise in 1987. I can't remember where he was in his career then, but he was a pretty much a household name then. He had done, I think he just finished The Color of Money or something, or the racing car movie with Paul Newman, something big. And I said, "He's a very nice guy." He goes, "Ah." And this other kid, Kiefer, Kevin Bacon, whatever this kid behind, said something similar about meeting him. And I said, "Well, he's around here a lot." I didn't want to say, "Oh, I'm coming back here at 8 a.m, meet us here." I didn't want to do that. So I says, "Oh, he's around here a lot. And you'll run into him." "Oh, well, nice meeting you." And then they both just took off down the sidewalk again through down part of their rooms. I'm thinking, this is crazy. And it hit me as as he's talking to me, finally, "Oh, this is Tom Cruise. This is Tom Cruise." And he was just a small, he's not a big guy. And so I thought they were younger teens that ran right into me. But so that kind of stuff happened a lot with Don. People that are very well known would come up to us at a Laker game, a Dodger game, any of the big. That was the year the Lakers won their world championship in '87. And I had people walking up in the in VIP lounges. And I'm in there going, damn, I'm recognizing everybody, almost everybody in the room, famous people. And they'd be coming up. And Dominic will be over here talking to the press, and I'd be kind of close. They'd be tapping my shoulder. I'd turn around and, it's another one of these guys saying, "Hey, can we meet him?" Or yeah, one of those guys, Rick Dees was a famous DJ here in LA at the time. And he had a little son with him. And I looked at him and I knew who he was. I didn't know who Don Johnson was. I knew Rick Dees. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "My God, my son must be Can we meet Don?" I said, "Just stay right here. Stay right here." So when Don came back, I kind of put my arm around both of them, put them in front of me. And Don recognized Rick Dees and said, "Hey, how you doing?" It was crazy. I mean, even a lot of the Lakers players were nervous around him. It was hilarious. So it was a really fun time. It was a great year. But Ed Parker called and that was it. It was it.
So what's your craziest Hollywood? You must have some good Hollywood stories, apart from bouncing Tom Cruise.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. None that I was fond of at the time, but I will tell you, see, the reason I didn't like doing all of that kind of stuff, Don was fine because Don wasn't a drinker at the time. He wasn't drinking. So he was always sober and he was on the wagon. So he didn't like being around drunk people, but you can't, certain celebrities would get in the car and go with us places and they'd get drunk. So that's one of the main reasons I was there, to keep those kind of people off. He went there, famous people, they'd get kind of stupid. I remember, we're out in front of a club and I hated the clubs because if they didn't have their own security to come kind of surround us, it was just me against, you know, 200 drunken idiots. And it's just never safe. When you go to where the Lakers played, it was a place called the Forum. We would call ahead and they'd have their own security already there. And their security team's like 10 guys. They would surround me and Don as we walked in. So everywhere we went, we were surrounded by about 10 guys. Dodger game was similar, not as heavy, but similar. Certain clubs would send out a security team and then we would stand between them as we go in. But this club, we didn't. I was alone that night. I didn't like it. And we went in front of a club and you pull up in a limousine and everyone starts looking around. Well, there were stairs that went up to the front doors of this club. And I pull up and I get around. I said, Don, just stay there. And I get around. And I'm coming to the side door and I'm just kind of checking things out, telling people back, 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 looking to see if there's any sort of bouncer. Sometimes I'll catch an eye of a bouncer and kind of go like this to get one of them to come down and come with me to bring him in and take him to a safe area. And I'm looking up there. I see no one. It's like, gosh. And so I'm looking at the car. I'm just figuring out the best way to get Don in there. And I hear a commotion up those stairs. Girls screaming, guys laughing, but, caught my attention. And I look, and out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody flying down those stairs, running at our car, right? Flying down the stairs, yelling about something. And the crowd just parted for this guy, and he's running. And so I was by my front door, and I look, and I see it, and I take a couple steps, because this guy gets about 6 feet from my limo and dives at the car. And I get in and put my arm all the way out, and I catch him with my right arm. He still slams against the car, but what he was trying to do was dive into the moonroof. Moonroof, Don had opened. Somewhere in that 10 seconds, he opened the damn moonroof. I didn't realize he had opened it. And later on, he would tell me why, but nevertheless. So I catch this guy, and he slams into my side of my car window, and I grab him, I turn around, I place him against the car. And once again, I'm looking at someone, and in all the commotion, I'm looking here and I'm looking there, because I think that maybe more coming. But I recognize it. And I hold him, and Don pops his head up out of the limousine and says, Bryan, stop. He says, he's a friend. I'm looking. And I said, Bruce Willis. And he goes, in the flesh. He's very drunk. Very funny, though. Bruce Willis was a hilarious drunk. He says, in the flesh. And I said, pull him up. I sorry about that. He goes, oh, no, you should have done that. Yeah, I'm a little crazy tonight, but I had to come see my friend Don. And he said, great catch, big man. You actually caught me in the air. And I said, yeah. He says, all right. And he says, okay, well, anyway, nice meeting you. And then just dives over the car into the moonroof anyway. And they go into the back of the car. But we met, the next time we went out, we met Bruce Willis somewhere. And Bruce had his own security. And then by the third time I went out, we met Bruce. And I said something like, where are your guys tonight? He goes, oh, no. I told them I don't need them anymore. And Don and I look at each other, and Don says, why don't you need them anymore? He goes, because I'm with you guys. He says, we got Bryan. So it's the three of us. Like, oh, sure. Come on. So now, but he's sober now. And he made mention of it. He says, I'm not drinking anymore either. So he cleaned up. And so now I had two celebrities, very, high value guys. And they both sober, which was key. And Bruce was probably the funnest guy, famous or not, that I've ever been out with. Extremely humorous, aware of things, courteous, not a dick to people. You're not mean to anybody. Treats, waiters and people that are there helping really with a lot of respect. Don was sometimes kind of acted like a movie star. I think he felt he needed to keep up that persona, but Bruce had none of that. Bruce was just a guy you could meet at the local bar who happens to be famous and had done a lot of movies. He had just finished Die Hard not too long before that, after doing his TV series or TV thing. But he was Die Hard was a huge breakout hit for him. So everybody knew who he was. So when we went to the 3 Lakers World Championship Lakers games that year, they won the championships. 3 of the games were in LA. We went to all 3. And we got to go back into the locker rooms afterwards. And at the time, I was teaching a guy named Mike Schmreck. Mike Schmreck was a big 7'1" white guy who trained at our Kenpo dojo. He was also the backup center for the Lakers. So he trained behind, he played behind Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the time. And Kareem was a student of Bruce Lee's. And so I told Mike, Mike Schmreck said, Kareem never respects me, never treats me with respect. And I said, well, tell him you're trained by the same guy who trained Bruce Lee. That wasn't quite the truth. Mike learned from me, who learned from Ed Parker, who trained Bruce Lee. But I says, it's close enough. Just say that. And he says, Bryan, it worked. So when I was in the locker room, Mike was there, and Kareem, he couldn't care less about Don Johnson, Bruce Willis. He'd been around a long time. Movie stars meant nothing to him. Magic Johnson was very friendly. All the guys were very friendly. But Kareem, I said something to Mike, and he motioned to Kareem that I was the Ed Parker guy who trained Bruce Lee. And so we had a couple words. It was very nice, because he was a devout martial artist, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So fun stuff like that. But I think Bruce Willis was one of the funniest, things that happened. It turned out well, it turned out okay. So yeah, lots of stories. There's endless stories about that stuff.
And in your stunt work that you did, tell us a little bit about that and any stories you've got about when you're doing the stunt work.
Yeah. Now, stunt work was mainly through, I don't even know how some of this stuff, mainly through people at the dojo. We had one woman who was doing some television series. They had her, it was the kind of thing where I taught a lot of people whose parents were producers of a lot of TV and TV projects. And whenever they had a scene where any kind of karate was involved, after a while they knew, Ed Parker was one of the first names, they would call. Remember Ed Parker, literally, actually, I have the very first, script ever written that had martial arts in it was for a series, I believe it was called Dangerous Robin. And I think it was in the late 50s or very early 60s. And the guy who wrote it, his son became my doctor. That doctor is now about 85 and just retired. He was a Kenpo student, and he had the original script of the original episode of Dangerous Robin. His father was the screenwriter, and he gave it to me as a gift. But Ed Parker was the first one to have karate TV, first one to do it in the films, first in everything, in terms of martial arts. So his name became in any production, movie or especially TV, and they had any sort of karate scene. I Love Lucy had a karate scene, that kind of thing. They would call Ed Parker, and he would put together a little karate scene for them. So he started passing some of that off to me. And before me, probably the other guys, but when I came on the scene, it was to me. So it was like little television series where the kids have a karate scene, or, girl has to show her boyfriend she's been doing karate. So they do stupid little stuff like that. So that's part of under the category of stunt work. It's like, I didn't have to go fall off buildings. You're just teaching, you're doing more choreography.
I'm your host, Peter Taz, and you've tuned in to the Mind Sensei Podcast from Down Under. We want to take a moment to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the Mind Sensei Podcast. We appreciate your support and hope our show has been both informative and entertaining for you. If you haven't already done so, we would like to invite you to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. Finally, we'd like to thank our guests for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. Without their generosity, this podcast would not be possible. Thank you again for listening to the Mind Sensei Podcast Down Under. We hope that you continue to join us on this journey through the world of martial arts.